Bet horse racing on DRF Bets. We'll match your first deposit of $200. Get free expert picks and past performances, plus weekly cash back. All from Daily Racing Form, the most trusted name in horse racing.
Hi everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here taking a look at the Tinsel Stakes, race 9 on Saturday at Oaklawn Park, one of 2 stakes they're running on the Saturday card in Hot Springs, Arkansas. This one is going 1 1/8 miles on the main track for older runners, a field of 8 signed on. And Craig, this is a pretty wide open field. We've got some runners that appear to be in good form that are getting a class test, some that have plenty of back class that you might want to question their current form. And it's really hard to figure out who is the horse to beat or who looks like they're really primed to run well in this spot, going the 1 1/8 miles distance.
I found this a very intriguing race. It's a good matchup, particularly at the 1 1/8 miles distance, one we don't see run it all that often at Oaklawn. It's usually saved for the bigger races. So it's one some horses I think are going to have the question mark stretching out to the 9th furlong.
As we see the 8-horse field for this race, the number 3 Run Classic listed at 8-5 on the morning line. I was a little surprised to see anybody listed that short in this race, but I do get the sense he will be the favorite here, just a runner that's pretty lightly raced with some upside. But as I said, there are plenty of runners with back class who would be pretty tough if they were able to get back to their better form. We'll talk about that in just a little bit, but first, let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector for this race. And maybe one of the reasons that Run Classic is viewed as the horse to beat by the morning line maker is that he does seem like one that is going to get the right trip for him setting the pace. And we'll see who presses him. The number 2 Hosier has some early speed, as does Bal Harbor. But Craig, Run Classic does seem like the early lead might be his for the taking.
It does. He's a horse who's shown plenty of speed in sprint races at times. When he stretched out, he was able to make the lead and just seems a little quicker than the others. So I totally agree with the pace projector in this spot.
Yeah, and this one does not have a fast or slow pace flag. It figures to be a pretty moderate pace. There's not a ton of speed signed on, but I also don't think any horses that are coming from off the pace are going to be that badly compromised, as there are a few that can press Run Classic. Before we get to the contenders, let's take a look at one new feature in Timeform US, the Finish Projector, and you can find this if you go to the new version of Timeform US that's being launched in Timeform US mobile PPs, and on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see how to access it by clicking on that right-hand tab in Timeform US in your DRF mobile PPs, and you can toggle on over to the Finish Projector from the Pace Projector, and this is a visual representation of the power picks that you might be familiar with from Timeform US PPs, basically the Timeform US algorithm picking who is most likely to win this race. And you can see, Craig, in this one, it's pretty decisive. The Timeform US likes the number 6 Logical Myth.
Yeah, and that's going to be largely based on his last speed figure at Zia Park, a race I'm sure we're going to talk about when we get to Logical Myth.
And you can kind of see in this Finish Projector the value of seeing how these horses are positioned, because in the old algorithm, in the old power picks, you might just see the number 6, 7, 3 listed in order, but you can see it's kind of a toss-up for second in the algorithm between the number 3 Run Classic and the number 7 King Fury. Well, let's take this field in post position order, going through the main contenders, and we'll begin with the number 1 Last Samurai. And he is one of these runners that does have plenty of back class and would be tough if he can get back to a performance like this when he won the Grade 2 Oaklawn Handicap going this distance last year, 1 1/8 miles at Oaklawn Park. And Craig, this was his crowning achievement in his final start for Dallas Stewart. After this, he switched into the barn of D-Lane Lucas and just has seemed like he may not quite be the same horse ever since.
Yeah, his speed figures declined a little bit off of that. I was wondering if maybe he was just a horse that really likes Oaklawn Park. But as I scroll back through his PPs, it seemed more to me like he was just a horse who got good when they happened to be at Oaklawn Park. So I don't want to put too much weight in those wins he got over the track. And I think he's a horse who, more or less like last time, was compromised by that slow pace more than it's going to show. And he is definitely taking a big drop in class, as you can see by looking at the Timeform US class ratings and also just the gradings of the races he comes out of, where 4 of the last 5 have been Grade 1 and Grade 2 races.
Yeah, when I was first assessing his chances in here, I was a little bit negative on him because it just did seem like he went off form after winning that Oaklawn handicap, getting into the D Wayne Lucas bar. But I agree with what you were saying about the pace of some of his races. They really haven't worked out for him. You see all those blue color coded pace figures in Timeform US. Those were also some tougher fields. Horses like Proxy and West Willpower would be heavy favorites in a race like this. So I do think Last Samurai is a horse that you definitely want to consider getting back to Oaklawn Park. The runner drawn right outside of him is the number 2 Hosier. He is coming off a victory last time out at Churchill Downs, going this 1.8 distance. But Craig, that was an off the turf race, and it did seem like he was one of the only dirt horses in a field of horses that were really meant for the turf course.
Right, and it didn't come back particularly fast either. He would have to improve several lengths off of that. I think this horse is way more likely a pace factor than a contender to win the race.
Yeah, and his trip could be made more difficult than it was last time because it does seem like the number 3 Run Classic, who is drawn right to his outside, just has more natural speed than he does. And speaking of Run Classic, let's take a look at his victory 2 back when he won at Keeneland. And this was a real breakout performance for him, Craig. I mean, he had run pretty well first off the layoff when he won at Churchill in September, but this was a big step forward for him, just smashing this N2X allowance field to win by over 8 lengths. This was just going 7 furlongs, though, and he did stretch out last time at Churchill Downs, got run down at the end, and that might make some people concerned about him going 2 turns again against this slightly tougher field.
Particularly at 1.125 miles. But the one thing I would caution about is his speed figure actually improved over that 8-length romp. You can see it went up 3 points when he was narrowly run down late by Farmington Road. My biggest concern with him is he is by run happy, and I do think you have to wonder if that 1.16 miles last out is probably right at the edge of his limit. A 1.125 miles can often just be a different ballgame.
Yeah, he does get a real stamina test here. I will point out that he did break his maiden going 1.16 miles when he was a early season 3-year-old. They stretched him out going the 2 turns in just the second start of his career. So clearly the connections have always thought that longer might be better for this horse. We'll see if that proves to be the case. He was setting a pretty fast pace last time in that allowance race at Churchill. You see that half-mile fraction is color-coded in red in the Timeform US PPs. There was a runner that really went after him on the front end. That horse dropped away to finish off the board. Run Classic opened up in mid-stretch and just kind of got swallowed up by one of the closers at the end. It was a blanket finish. There were about 6 horses within a length and a half of each other at the wire. Typically, I don't like to see that, but he was the only pace horse involved at the end. So maybe you want to upgrade Run Classic off that odds-on defeat last time out. The horse drawn right to his outside is the number 4 Bal Harbor, and this 7-year-old finally got back to the winner's circle 2 back. Let's take a look at that race when he won a claiming $50,000 event at Saratoga in the slop, going this 1.8 miles distance, but last time out, Craig, they tried to stretch him all the way out to 1.5 miles. He actually ran okay, but I don't want to be too hard on him for losing that marathon event.
No, that was a race on one of the Breeders' Cup days, if I remember right. Next to who was in there was very good. So it was a good effort. I wonder if Robertino Diodoro didn't claim Bal Harbor for those longer type races and is rethinking it after that try when he didn't quite run as well. But I have my questions about him. As you said, he finally got back to the winner's circle. His previous win had been back in 2018. I think it was an off-the-turf stakes race that he won, and it took a drop into the claiming ranks to get him back to the winner's circle last time. So this seems like a pretty big jump up for me, and especially at that 5-2 morning line. I'm not sure I agree with that morning line. I don't think he'll be that low.
Yeah, I agree with that. The price does seem a little bit too short onto him, but I mean, if he drifts up to somewhere around 5 or 6 to 1, he's the horse that you could be talked into, because even though that was a claiming race 2 back, you could see from that Timeform US race rating of 117, that was a pretty high level race. You had a lot of runners in there with back class, with good allowance for him. So that might have been a tougher race than you might assess just from looking at the conditions of the race. Bal Harbor is a horse that definitely does have plenty of back class, but his good races came, as Craig was noting, starting 3 and 4 years ago. So we'll see what we get from him now, second off the claim for trainer Robertino Diodoro. Got another old timer to his outside, the number 5 Silver Dust. He is an 8-year-old, another runner who hasn't done that much winning in recent seasons. And he also tried a marathon distance 2 back when he was second to today's rival Scarlet Fusion. Last time out, just seemed to regress, going the mile and 3/16 distance, and just feels like he's a runner that's probably seen better days.
I would agree. He's an 8-year-old gelding, no knocks. I love these kind of horses. Just seems like this is a bit of an ambitious placement. His speed figures aren't what they used to be a couple years ago. And, you know, what of us are as we get older? We all slow down. But he certainly has by a few lengths, and I don't see him finding a fountain of youth for this race.
Well, one older runner that seems to have a new lease on life switching over to the dirt course is the number 6 Logical Myth. And let's take a look at his last race when he switched over from turf to dirt in the Zia Championship at Zia Park. And he lost this race, but he was 14-1 against what was a pretty solid field for a stakes at Zia. And you could see he's battling on pretty gamely to the wire here, just inside of Soy Tapatio, who was one of the favorites in this race. And Craig, for a race at this racetrack, Zia Park, it came up surprisingly fast. He got a pretty big 120 Timeform US speed figure.
It did, and I went back and looked at the card when I made the speed figures on this day, and it totally fits with the other races. Zia is always a fast track, so just looking at the final time, it will look like it was fast, but compared to the other races, it was a quick one. And Zia has a lot of hard-knocking older horses out there. All the New Mexico races, the stakes races always come up pretty good. They have good purses, so you don't see a lot of them shipping. But for me, that 120 is totally legit. And I think he's a pretty strong contender in here.
Yeah, I guess my question with him is just where did that come from? Because he had tried dirt before, and while he had run okay on it, I mean, you can see just recently in his PPs, he had lost a $25,000 claiming race back in April. That was going 7 furlongs, but I mean, he had tried dirt a couple times prior to that and had run fine, but not nearly approaching the kind of speed figure that he got last time. So I do have some questions about whether he can repeat it against tougher company, but he definitely is an intriguing player in this race. Moving outside of him to the number 7, King Fury. He is another one of these runners that does have back class and is looking to get back on track here with a slight drop. He's running some of the same races as Last Samurai, particularly last time in the Fayette Stakes when he finished just behind that rival. Craig, as a 3-year-old, he looked like the kind of horse that could eventually turn into one of the top older horses in the country. It just hasn't quite panned out this year as a 4-year-old.
No, I remember when he won the Bourbon Trail Stakes by about a football field and got a huge figure. I was thinking he might be one that was going to jump into the elite 3-year-old class, and they tried him running in some big races, and it just hasn't worked out. He actually hasn't run since that race, hasn't run back to the speed figures. He seems like he's a horse who gets a bit pace compromised. When he's way back, he just isn't able to make it up. And when he stays closer to the pace, he doesn't seem to have that same finishing kick.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He's one that definitely does need some pace to develop up front, perhaps more than anybody else in this field. So we'll see what we get from King Fury as he drops back down into this listed stakes race. And we'll close things out with the number 8, Scarlet Fusion, drawn on the outside of this 8-horse field. And he's one who's actually turning back in distance for this race, kind of like Bal Harbor. He tried a different marathon race last time when he went 1.5 miles in an optional claimer at Churchill Downs, beat today's rival Silver Dust that day, but he's just going to have to get faster overall if he's going to be competitive against this field.
Right. The 112 he ran last time in that 1.5 mile race is borderline, could make him a contender. I say 112 because that's what I have in with the weight adjustments. Without, it's a 110. But at the 1.5 miles, it's a lot different than a 1.1 miles, obviously. It looks like he's improving. I wouldn't totally write him off. If I was going to play horizontal bets, he would be like a C-type horse for me, but it would be a stretch for me to get him into the winner's circle.
Let's take a look at our top picks for this race. And with it being this competitive, I'm not surprised that we landed in slightly different spots here. I went back to Last Samurai, Craig. You might remember this is a horse that I was a fan of last winter, and I wasn't really expecting to pick him when I started handicapping this race. But the more that I went through this field, it just feels like he might be getting the kind of class relief that could wake him up in this spot. And I don't think he's so slow early that he's going to be that badly pace compromised like he's been in a few prior starts.
Yeah, I definitely think he has some excuses. The slow pace last time, 2 back, he was chasing a superior rival, one that I just hate when you chase a lone leader like that. I almost went with him, but I went with the speed figure and Logical Myth. I like what he seemed to have turned things around since he was claimed. Even his turf figures, he was pretty badly off form when he was in his old barn. Since he's been claimed, he's turned it around, and at a big price, I'm going to take a shot that 120 speed figure at Zia is totally legit.
Yeah, I have my doubts about Logical Myth, but I'm not going to talk you off him if he's near that 10-1 morning line. It does feel like he's the kind of horse that probably isn't going to take that much money in this race. So he's definitely a wild card in this Tinsel Stakes on Saturday at Oaklawn Park. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.